Some people say that black women are angry, say that black women are too loud, are difficult, aggressive, hard to deal with. That's what some people say. They say black women are too emotional, too bitter, and too strong, too much. Again, that's what some say. And if a black woman is smart, they say she's out of touch. If she has high self-esteem, they say that she thinks too much of herself. If she speaks with confidence, they say that she's arrogant. If she corrects the record, they say she's being difficult. If she sets a boundary, they say she's got an attitude. If she's a single mother, they say that she made bad choices in life. If she works 2 jobs and can barely keep the lights on, they say she's not working hard enough. They don't see the strength in a black woman. They only look for something to blame in a black woman. They say these things like it's her character, but it's really just their cover, a way to dismiss black women, to silence black women, to justify what was done to her or what was never done for her. They're offended when a black woman calls herself a queen, disturbed when she takes up space, rattled when she demands to be heard and refuses to shrink. They're always ready to condemn black girl magic, but they never want to talk about black girl grief. They don't want to talk about the weight, the generational trauma passed down from mother to daughter to granddaughter and on and on. They don't want to talk about the silence that she's carried, the shame that she's worn, the fear of being harmed and then being disbelieved. They don't want to talk about what's been done to black women or what is still being done to her. But in this video, we are going to talk about it. This is the 3rd story in our Injustice by Design series, where we've been tracing how racial injustice in America was not a failure, it was a function. Not broken, but built. The system working exactly as it was intended. In each episode, we've uncovered something really deep. In the first story, we met a man named Ned Thompson, a black man born in slavery, only to be re-enslaved by the convict leasing system where he died a horrific death. In the second story, we showed you how black resistance to that injustice was met with white terror, and how the Klan rose with the support of sheriffs and courts, and how the law was designed to excuse that violence. And now, in this story, we turn to black women. Because black injustice was never gender specific. Jim Crow came for us all, and he reserved a special kind of terror for black women. One that attacked her at her very core, attacked her body, her mind, and her spirit, her very sense of self, destroyed her dignity, shattered her safety. But injustice could not steal her strength because she's still here. And no matter how hard they tried, they could not silence her story. And we're going to tell part of their story today. I need to tell you up front, this story contains a deeply sensitive subject, one that deals with violation, one that deals with attacks on black women, the kind that went unspoken, unpunished, and unresolved. Some of what you're going to hear is going to be hard, very hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat that because what was done cannot be sugarcoated. But as hard as this is to hear, remember this, black women lived through it. So I want you to know this moving forward. This story is not about sensationalizing. This is about truth-telling. It's about restoring what was stolen, about honoring the countless sisters whose names we will never know, whose stories died with them, whose pain was never believed, whose humanity was never seen. One of the women we're going to talk about today, she faced an attack that struck her at her very core. We tell her story in love, because what she endured was hate. We offer love, because only love can drive out hate. Only love can restore. And that's exactly what we're doing through this Memory Justice Project. We are restoring what was stolen from so many black people, what was denied to them, dignity, love, and respect. And with every story that we tell, with every name that we remember, we are giving some of that back. And I want to thank each of you who stood with us in this work. We could not do this without you. These stories take time, they take care, and they take labor. But you all, you make it worth doing. And to our Patreon supporters, I want to say a special thank you to you. Your support has helped us go deeper, to research more, to bring on more help, to keep this project alive. Every single cent that you've given has gone toward making sure that these stories are not forgotten. And we now have supporters from literally all over the world. To our brothers and our sisters in the United Kingdom, thank you. To those in Europe who've pledged support, thank you. I think I even saw someone from South America join us the other day. Wherever you are watching from, just know that we see you and we are grateful. I wanted to take a moment to say that here because I don't always get to do it in the videos. So thank you, truly. Okay, so now let me tell you about the black woman and the black woman who have been targeted and how their pain was ignored and how their dignity was denied. On May 1st, 1866, a free black woman named Frances Thompson was at her home in Memphis, Tennessee. She was there with another free black girl, 16-year-old Lucy Smith. The fact that I'm referring to them as free women says a lot, because this was 1866, 1 year after black people were emancipated from the chains of slavery. So just think about that as I tell you the rest of this. Frances and Lucy thought they were safe inside, but they were not, because outside, a world of trouble was going on, a race riot. Black people in Memphis had been freed early in the Civil War when the city fell to Union forces. Newly freed black men had joined the army and worked for the federal government. They served and integrated in all black militia units, which for many white Southerners became a symbol of black rule, even though that was far from the truth. But in May of 1866, that symbol became a target. An incident between black militiamen and white police officers became the spark for a campaign of terror. The rioting lasted 3 days. Dozens of black people lost their lives. Black churches and schools were burned, and black women were attacked. Frances and Lucy likely knew what was going on, but they hoped it wouldn't reach their door. But it did. At around 2 a.m., 7 white men came to Frances' home. At least 2 of them were police officers. They demanded that Frances cook them food. They wanted eggs, ham, and biscuits. Terrified, Frances did what they asked. She and Lucy cooked the food. They hoped that this would be enough, that the men would eat and just leave. But it wasn't. After they were full, the men told Frances that they wanted women. Frances told them that they weren't those kind of women, and the men needed to leave. But the men said that didn't make a difference to them. They drew their weapons. They beat Frances and Lucy, and then they took turns with them. Frances and Lucy weren't the only ones. This happened to countless other black women and black girls during that campaign of terror. And what happened to Frances and Lucy, it wasn't even seen as a crime. It wasn't even seen as wrong. This injustice against black women was seen as just another day. And what happened to Frances and Lucy didn't die with the riot, because the violence that black women faced, the denial of their pain, the stripping of their agency, the silence that followed, it didn't end with slavery. It didn't end with emancipation. It was passed down, institutionalized, and refined. And the woman at the center of our story, a black woman named Gertrude Perkins, she went through something heartbreakingly similar, because what she faced in 1949 was not an accident. It was a continuation. And to understand what happened to Gertrude, we have to understand the system that shaped her world. Before I tell you what happened to Gertrude, let me talk with you for a moment about this continuation of disregard, this continuation of disrespect, this continuation of harming black women, of ignoring their pain, erasing their truth, and acting like their suffering didn't matter. Because what happened to Gertrude didn't start with her, and it didn't end with her either. Before the whip was ever cracked, before the chains were locked, before her name was taken, her body was already claimed, not as her own, but as theirs. It was never up for debate whether she could say no, whether she could resist, whether she could defend her dignity, because no one ever truly asked. No one ever truly saw her. She was alive, but not present. She was seen, but never recognized. Her humanity was separated from her person, her dignity divorced from her existence. She wasn't seen as a woman. She was seen as a vessel for labor, a vessel for violence, a vessel for use. And that belief, that lie, was not born on the plantation. It was born long before, out at sea on ships, where they first learned to strip a black woman of her body and call it power and call it their right. The most famous Christian hymn in the world is Amazing Grace. Just about anyone who spent time in church knows it. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Powerful words. Words that have led generations to the cross of Calvary. Words that feel sacred to so many. It was written by John Newton in 1779. Newton was a former slave ship captain, but before he ever wrote that hymn, he violated countless black women aboard those ships. By his own admission, he did it on almost every occasion that he had, because on those ships, he said the access was unlimited, because that's what the slave ship was. Not just a vessel of cargo, but a vessel of cruelty, a floating prison, a mobile marketplace, a site of desecration. And for black women, it was a place where their bodies were claimed before they even touched American soil. Because to violate a black woman wasn't seen as a crime on those ships. It was seen as a custom, a part of the process, as a feature, not a flaw of the system that they were building. And so John Newton went on to find grace. What did we find? What did black women find? Only the pain of dying at sea and being forgotten, or the pain of surviving only to be sold into slavery, where they labored in injustice until the day that they died. No hymns were written for them, no songs of grace, no reckonings or repentance, just silence for her. But it didn't end there. Remember, this system of abuse was built and refined. The plantation only gave them space to submit the cruelty, to perfect the pain. And what happened on those plantations, it wasn't just labor, it wasn't just cotton, it was a system of access, of entitlement, of violation. Let me tell you about one of those stories. Mary Esther Peterson was born into slavery, but her story doesn't start with her. It starts with her mother. Her mother was just 15 years old, and the man who owned her, he had 3 sons, 17, 19, and 21 years old. And one day, when the mother was alone, the 3 of them came into her cabin. They threw her down. They tied her up so she couldn't move, so she couldn't fight, so she couldn't escape. And one after the other, they used her. That's the word that Mary used later when she gave her testimony. They used her mother all afternoon until they were done. And this happened over and over again. No one stopped them. No one punished them. Because what they did, as I said before, wasn't seen as wrong. It was seen as normal. She was property. She was there. She was theirs. So they took what they wanted. And this wasn't just one day. This was the pattern. This was the structure. This was the design. And it wasn't just abuse being inflicted by slave masters. They didn't only participate in it. They directed it. They orchestrated it. They turned other enslaved people into instruments of their cruelty. Let me tell you about a young girl named Rose Williams. Rose was 16, born in Texas, born enslaved. Her owner decided that Rose should have children, not for love, not for family, but for profit. So he ordered another enslaved man named Rufus to lay with her, to bring forth portly children, he said, children who would grow strong and make him more money. Rose refused. She kicked Rufus out of the bed. She said no. But her no didn't matter because her owner made the rules. And in his eyes, her body was not her own. It was his to use and to pair and to breed. That's what this system did. That's what they did to black women. Stole even the most intimate parts of black life, love, desire, family, and turned them into a transaction. There were other girls too, like Louisa in Virginia, forced by her owner to lay with another enslaved black man. But this time, the master didn't want children. He wanted to watch, to turn their humiliation into his entertainment. That was the power they believed they had, to own your labor, to own your body, to own your love, to own your pain. So when you hear the word slavery, don't just think forced labor. Don't just think work without pay. Think life without ownership of self, because that's what it was. It wasn't just bondage of the body. It was the erasure of being, the denial of identity, the complete stripping away of choice, will, and worth. So we talked about the slave ship. We've talked about slavery. And that was a lot. I mean, it was a lot to hear, and it was a lot to take in. And I want to thank those of you who are still watching, because I know it was rough. It was hard to sit with. But I need you to know, I'm not just telling these stories to shock you. I am building an argument, like I would if I were in court. I'm laying out the evidence, piece by piece, because injustice by design didn't just affect black people broadly. It affected black women in a distinct and devastating way, a deeper way, a more painful way. We're building to Gertrude's story. But before we get there, I need just a few more moments of your attention, because I need to show you what happened after slavery ended, because the abuse didn't stop. Remember, we started this story talking about Frances Thompson and Lucy Smith, black women attacked, violated, and forgotten. And that didn't stop after emancipation. It kept going. Because once slavery ended, they didn't stop denying black women. They didn't stop disrespecting black women. They just found new ways to do it, through silence and through shame and through systems that still saw her body as theirs and not hers. And it's that denial, that ongoing disregard, that leads us straight to what happened to Gertrude. Because what happened to her in 1949 wasn't an isolated incident. It was a continuation of the design. Slavery was over. The 13th Amendment had abolished chattel slavery. But the perpetrators of that evil institution, the men who owned and sold and brutalized black people, they did not disappear. They were still living, still walking free, still actors of injustice. And let's be honest, you don't just stop doing what you've been doing for hundreds of years just because the law changed. They never respected the law of humanity, so the rule of law meant nothing to them. But legally, things had changed, because with emancipation came something new. Black women, for the first time, were given the legal right to accuse a white man of violating them. They now had the right to bring charges, to speak, and to be heard, at least in theory. Because after the war, federal law forced former slaveholding states to purge their legal codes of racial language, including those that dealt with sexual violence. That meant black women had the right to be included, finally seen in the eyes of the law as capable of being violated and entitled to protection. Tennessee gives us a clear example. Before emancipation, the law there only defined violation as the carnal violation of a white woman by a black man. Black women weren't even written into the statute, because to the law, they could not be violated. Their pain did not count. But during Reconstruction, Tennessee rewrote the law. The new definition said, the unlawful carnal knowledge of a woman forcibly and against her will. No more racial categories, just woman. It might sound simple now, but back then it was radical. On paper at least, black women were finally named, but not every state accepted that change. Kentucky, in 1867, still defined the attacker as someone who violated any white woman against her will or consent. South Carolina kept racial-based language in its statutes too. So even as freedom came, you could still be black and invisible. You could still be violated and still be unprotected, because changing the law didn't change the hearts of the men who enforced it. But there's something else you need to understand. Something else that changed after slavery, at least on paper. Because just as important as black women gaining the right to bring charges was the right to testify. Under slavery, no black person, man or woman, was allowed to testify in court against a white person. Their words held no legal weight. Their voice did not count. But after the Civil War, that changed. New laws passed during Reconstruction allowed black people to testify in both civil and criminal trials. And that shift was monumental, because now a black woman could do more than accuse. She could testify. She could take the stand and say what was done to her and who did it. It removed one of the biggest barriers to justice, the legal silencing of black victims. For the first time in American law, a black woman's word could be heard against the white man's. No more slave ships, no more plantations. Black women were finally included in the laws that define who could be harmed. So, did it stop? Did this long, brutal legacy of violence against black women finally end? Did the abuse stop once the laws changed? We already know the answer because we still have to talk about Gertrude. And what happened to her in 1949 proves that the laws may have changed, but the system did not. Gertrude Perkins was a 25-year-old black woman living in Montgomery, Alabama in 1949. We don't know much about her story before this. We don't know where she was born, don't know what kind of childhood she had, don't know what dreams she held on to. We simply don't know her story, only her pain. But that is not going to stop us. It's not going to stop us from telling her story with dignity. Not going to stop us from bringing her name out of the shadows of injustice and into the light of truth. Because even if the record is thin, the impact is not. What happened to Gertrude Perkins shook an entire city. It exposed the system and called a community to action. This was more than a moment. This was a mirror. It was a reflection of how deep injustice ran and how far people would go to ignore it. On March 27, 1949, at around 2:25 a.m., Gertrude Perkins was walking along the road near Derby Grill when two Montgomery police officers stopped her. They arrested her for public drunkenness. Whether she was actually intoxicated, we don't know. But that does not matter, because whether she was or wasn't has no bearing on what happened next, no bearing on what they did, on how they treated her. There is no excuse for what they did. These two white police officers put Gertrude in the back of the car and drove off. We don't know what they said to her. We don't know what promises were made or what threats that they whispered, but we do know what they did next. They did not take Gertrude to the police station. They drove her to an alley at the edge of town. Gertrude remembered that the time was around 2:30 a.m. because she saw it on the officer's watch. The men got out of the car, opened the back door, and what happened next, it was not law enforcement related. It was violence. It was more of the same. The same disregard, the same disrespect, the same degradation of black women that had been going on for centuries. From the slave ships to the plantations to Reconstruction to right here in Montgomery, Alabama in 1949. They drew their weapons on her and then they attacked her repeatedly, over and over again. We don't know how long it went on, but Gertrude remembered one thing. They kept taking turns. Gertrude was out that night. She was not bothering anyone, not harming anyone, not doing anything to anyone. Yet here she was, being harmed. Here she was, powerless. Here she was, like countless black women before her, suffering because she was a black woman. Suffering because she was a black woman meant that they did not believe that she was deserving of rights, deserving of her body, deserving to say the word no. The word no wasn't even recognized as something that a black woman could say. So here she was, in the back of that car, suffering and surviving. This is the kind of trauma where tears refuse to fall, where you scream at the top of your lungs but nothing comes out, fear that freezes, sorrow that sinks you. Here Gertrude was, another black woman, another daughter, another sister, another, going through. And remember, Gertrude breathed through every second of that attack. It wasn't just an attack. It was seconds. It was minutes. It was inhaling. It was exhaling. It was the weight of those bodies pushing her down. It was pain racking her body. It was the sound of breathing that wasn't hers. It was the knowing that no one was coming to rescue her. It was horror. So here Gertrude was. And I want you to think about that. Not to visualize it, not to sensationalize it, not to reenact it in your mind, but to understand that this was real. This wasn't just a story. This wasn't just history. This happened to her. A real black woman with a real name who went through real pain. And what you've just heard, that was only Act 1. Because for Gertrude Perkins, there was still more to come. After the men were done, after they had their turns and their fun, they threw Gertrude out of the car. And then they just left. They drove off, leaving Gertrude there, alone, in an alley, with pain and fear, with shame that didn't belong to her anyway. But somehow, Gertrude found the strength to get up, to pull herself together, just enough, and walk back into town. She went to the home of her pastor, Reverend Solomon C. Reverend C. pastored the Mount Zion AME Church. He was also involved in the Negro Civic and Improvement League. When he opened the door, Gertrude broke down. She was sobbing and crying uncontrollably. Reverend C. asked her what was wrong. And Gertrude, she found one more ounce of strength, just enough to tell him what had happened, what they had done to her. Reverend C. knew he had to help her. He quickly grabbed a pen and paper and began to take notes, painstakingly, carefully, trying to get it all down, word for word, every detail, every moment. Something had to be done, he thought. So he and Gertrude stayed up all night while she relived the horror he wrote. While she wept, he listened. And together, they captured her truth so it wouldn't be lost, so it couldn't be denied. This part of the story really stayed with me, and let me explain why. For a moment, I want you to leave 2025 and go back with me to 1949, because when you do, you'll realize just how powerless Black people were. Our injustice was everywhere. Black brutality was normalized. Our pain was routine. Our humanity was disregarded on a daily basis. So then the question becomes, what was Reverend C. doing? What did he think he could accomplish? Why write this down? It wasn't like this hadn't happened before. It wasn't like our stories weren't already being told. Black newspapers were full of them. The NAACP had documented countless cases. And yet, still, injustice ruled the day. But this moment with Reverend C., it showed me something. It showed me a refusal to settle, a refusal to stay silent, a refusal to let the truth die. It reminded me that even when power was stripped away, Black people still found a way to stand, still found a way to say, I am here and I will not be erased. Because Gertrude was one in a long line of Black women suffering these same attacks in Alabama. Attacks on Black men were rampant throughout the 1930s and the 1940s. In 1944, 24-year-old Reese Taylor was abducted and attacked while walking home from church. She identified her white attackers. The law knew who they were. Rosa Parks, who was the secretary of the Montgomery NAACP at the time, led a powerful campaign to win justice for Reese. And still, 2 all-white grand juries refused to indict a single white man. Montgomery NAACP chair E.D. Nixon told a reporter from the Chicago Defender that cases like Reese Taylor's were so common that they were taken as a matter of course. He said that the local NAACP was keeping a file with 50 cases of what he called rotten violence against Black people in just 2 years. Cases like that of 24-year-old Sadie Mae Dixon, a school teacher who was attacked in 1942 by a 16-year-old white teen in Decatur, Alabama. That incident led to the formation of a local NAACP chapter. In 1948, just 1 year before Gertrude's case, a man in Clio, Alabama, lured an 11-year-old girl into his car and attacked her. And it wasn't just civilians. The police often preyed on Black women and Black girls. 3 years before Gertrude's case, a Black woman named Viola White refused to give up her seat on the bus. Police beat her, and she sued. In retaliation for suing, a white detective abducted her daughter, drove her to a cemetery, and attacked her. So what Reverend C. was doing that night was not a one-time act of courage. It was a part of a longer fight, a fight for Black women, a fight against a system that never saw their bodies as sacred, that never saw their bodies as real, never saw them as deserving of protection, of dignity, of rights, of the right to say no. The next day, Gertrude went to the police station. She was going to report what had happened to her, just like Reese had done, just like Sadie had done, just like so many Black women had done before her. But that went nowhere. The police didn't care. City officials didn't care. Montgomery Mayor John L. Goodwin and the police commissioner refused to hold a lineup or even allow Gertrude to see a roster of which officers were working that night. And the reason they said that it would violate the officers' constitutional rights. I mean, can you believe that? 2 white men take Gertrude in the dead of the night, drive her to the edge of town, and violate her. And when she tries to report it, they say a lineup will be unfair to the officers. That wasn't just ridiculous, it was revealing. It was revealing of how little regard they had for black women's safety, for black women's dignity, and for black women's truth. And the mayor didn't stop there. He publicly called Gertrude's accusations completely false, said his officers would not do anything like that, as if they were incapable, as if their uniforms made them honorable, as if their word was more believable than Gertrude's trauma. And then, after she filed her complaint, Gertrude said she saw those same officers drive up to her on the street and offer her gifts, as if it would just go away. They said she could just forget about the whole thing. She said another police car, car 23, pulled up and also talked to her. They had no shame, no fear, just impunity. That's how confident they were that the system would protect them, and not her. But the mayor's refusal to investigate, that wasn't the end of it, because Reverend C wasn't done, and neither was the black community in Montgomery. He began organizing right away, mobilizing his congregation and calling other pastors to action, refusing to let this die in silence. Out of that resistance, a new coalition was formed, the Citizens Committee for Gertrude Perkins. It came together under the Negroes Ministers Alliance, alongside the local NAACP chapter. And yes, Rosa Parks was right there too. Together, they launched a full court press. They sent Gertrude's story to syndicated radio host Drew Pearson. They pressured the Montgomery Advertiser, a newspaper there, to keep the story alive. They passed out pamphlets and they held protests and they demanded answers. The city tried to bury this, but the black community said, not this time. But black resistance, it was always met with black injustice. So when they stood up for Gertrude, the system stood up to knock them down. Reverend C was arrested. The charge was disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. And they beat him. Now, here's what they claim happened. They said that they were searching for a black man who had attacked a white woman, and that when they saw Reverend C, a well-known pastor exiting the YMCA with friends, they said he matched the description. Said that when they tried to stop him, he became violent. He was booked and he was charged. The charges were later dismissed. But the message, that stayed. You fight for her, and we come for you. And Reverend C wasn't the only one that was targeted. Others were followed, intimidated, and threatened. Community members later came forward and said that the police had a plan to take Reverend C's life. All for standing beside Gertrude Perkins. All for trying to hold the system accountable. That never had been forced to answer for what it had done to black women. But that backlash to black resistance, it didn't crush the movement. It grew it. Even more conservative and reticent ministers began to step forward because what was happening was undeniable. This incident, this fight for Gertrude, it took place in Montgomery, Alabama in 1949. That's 6 years before the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955. 6 years before the protests that will launch the modern civil rights movement and introduce the world to a young preacher named Martin Luther King Jr. But the roots of that movement, they're right here in this story, right here in the fight for Gertrude. Because look who's here. We have E.D. Nixon, we have Rosa Parks, we have Reverend C, all central to the bus boycott, all already fighting before the cameras came, before the speeches and the songs. And that's what's so powerful about this work. We're able to uncover the names that history tried to leave behind, the names that never made the textbooks, but helped to build the road that we walk on today. We've got to tell the full story, give more names, give more places, and remind more people that our story didn't just happen on a few stages or in a few marches. It wasn't just, I have a dream. It wasn't just Rosa Parks sitting down. It wasn't just the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It was Gertrude Perkins. It was Reverend C. It was the people whose names don't get repeated every February. Our story happened in living rooms, in small churches, in hushed conversations, in bold resistance with no cameras watching. It happened when no one was looking, when no one was reporting, when no one thought that it mattered. Our story is not neatly contained. It is not just the polished parts, it's the buried parts, the quiet parts, the parts that they tried to erase. Our story is far and wide, it's deep, it's layered, it's complex, and it's full of people whose names you may never know, but who made history just the same. All right, let me take you back to Gertrude because her story wasn't over yet. Just like in most cases like this, detractors played the same tired card. Blame the outside agitators. Blame the NAACP. Blame the North for stirring up things. Blame them for coming down here and causing trouble for the good Negroes. That was the refrain, over and over. It was never the racism, never the brutality, never the injustice inflicted on black people that was the problem. No, the problem they claimed was the people fighting against it, a twisted logic that only Jim Crow could invent. And that was the fight that Reverend C and others were up against. Not just defending Gertrude, but defending their defense of Gertrude. That logic, that's exactly what we've been exploring here. Injustice by design. Anytime we spoke up about our pain, the response was the same. You all are lying. You're lying about lynching. He wasn't burned alive. He was already dead. You're lying about segregation. There's a substandard and barely funded school for you. You're lying about sharecropping. It was a fair deal. Never mind the rigged books. Never mind that you worked the land from sunup to sundown, only to still owe more than you earned. And you signed another contract, and another, and another. That's not my fault. You're lying about convict leasing. We didn't sell you to a railroad. It was a timber company. You're lying about Gertrude. She made it all up. That was the twisted logic of Jim Crow. Not just to harm us, but to call us liars when we said that we were harmed. That is what they were fighting. Fighting not just for Gertrude, but for the truth itself. The black newspaper, the Alabama Tribune, published an article written by the NAACP and other groups supporting Gertrude. The title was simple, it was direct and unflinching. It was strange as it seems. In the article, they called out the obvious. How is it that the officers who attacked Gertrude can't be identified? They wrote, why would Gertrude lie about this? They said that Gertrude had become more than just a victim. She had become the symbol of every black woman in Montgomery. Because by doing nothing, the city was sending a message that every black woman should simply submit to the lustful advances of white men, and that no black man could sleep peacefully at night, knowing that the law would not protect his wife, his mother, his daughter, or his sister, especially when it was the law carrying out the attacks. But we weren't just sitting back. We were carrying our own story, writing it down, printing the truth, demanding that it be seen, because we knew that the world wasn't going to tell it for us. And so members of the Citizens Committee, including local NAACP chair, E.D. Nixon, called a meeting, an indignation meeting. That's what they called it. They invited the press. They handed out Gertrude's statement. They put the truth in their hands. And the white newspapers, they refused to print it. And by it, I mean the truth. They refused to print the truth of what happened, what Gertrude went through, what she survived. I mean, think about that. They had no problem printing what was alleged against us, whether it was true or not. No problem running headlines that branded us as criminals, as troublemakers, as threats. But this, a black woman as a victim, a black woman telling her truth, they wouldn't print it. And that silence, that refusal, told us everything we needed to know about how they felt about us and our women. Her pain didn't matter. Her truth didn't matter. She did not matter. And that is why we have to carry these stories ourselves, just like they did. Finally, after weeks of pressure, after protests, after bad press, city officials gave in. They convened a grand jury. Gertrude came forward and signed a sworn statement that 2 Montgomery police officers had attacked her. But let's be clear, they weren't unknown, as the city insisted on calling them. Gertrude could identify them. She knew who they were. The problem wasn't her memory. The problem was the city's refusal to let her see a lineup or give her the officers' names. Sheriff George Mosley made a show of cooperation, said he would attempt to identify the men, but that promise was empty. Meanwhile, Reverend C and local black organizations had raised funds to hire 2 attorneys for Gertrude, 2 brothers, Jack and Virgil McGee. And they quickly discovered what Gertrude already knew. Only 1 pair of officers was on duty at the time. Their names were not a mystery. They could be easily obtained, but still, the police refused. So Gertrude's attorneys took the next step. They filed a legal action in court, seeking to compel the mayor and city officials to release the names of the officers. Because if justice would not open the door, they were going to try and knock it down for Gertrude. Mayor Goodwin denied that he was withholding the officers' names. He claimed that information was in the hands of the solicitor, W.T. Siebels. Siebels also claimed that he had personally investigated Gertrude's allegations and found them to be completely false. That's what he said. That's what they always said. A hearing was set before Judge Eugene Carter, and black people showed up. I mean, they packed that courtroom, hoping that this would finally be the moment someone had to answer, the moment the truth could no longer be denied. And Gertrude showed up too. She wanted to hear the names of her attackers. She hoped, after everything that she had endured, that this would be the first real step towards justice. She had been delayed. She had been denied at every turn, but still, she kept showing up. The hearing got underway, and it got heated. So heated that Gertrude's lawyers, Jack and Virgil McGee, nearly came to blows with the lawyers representing the sheriff. And after all of that, another disappointment. Judge Carter ruled that he would not compel the names to be released, because doing so, he claimed, would violate the U.S. Constitution. Which amendment? He didn't say, but that was the excuse that he gave. So let's sit with that for a second. Gertrude Perkins, a citizen of this country, could not bring charges against the men who attacked her, because learning their names, according to the court, would be unconstitutional. Again, that is logic only Jim Crow could love. But it's also what we've been showing you this entire time. Injustice by design. There was no rule that wouldn't be twisted, no law that wouldn't be ignored, no fiction that wouldn't be believed, if it meant keeping us from getting justice. That was the fight. And in some ways, it still is. But there was still the grand jury. Would Gertrude finally get justice? On May 20, 1949, the grand jury convened. Gertrude was one of over 30 witnesses who testified, including more than 10 city police officers and detectives. Once again, Gertrude came forward. She stood up. She told the truth, out loud, direct. She said, "This happened to me." They know what they did. But the solicitor, Deputy Siebels, he did not come for justice. He came to tear her down. He cursed at her and tried to break her, tried to get her to say that it was all a lie. But Gertrude did not bend. She said, "No, I am not lying." She stood with dignity, with strength, despite the lies being told about her. Lies that said that she was drunk, that she was almost illiterate. But even that wasn't enough. The lead grand juror called her testimony manufactured lies. So their boyfriend, George Davis's statement, was full of discrepancies. They even pulled out a police radio log and said that it proved the officers were investigating something else at the time. They said that it was not helpful to race relations in the city, what Gertrude and Reverend C were doing. But if she were lying, if this were truly all made up, why wasn't she indicted for perjury? That's what her attorney, Jack McGee, wanted to know. Because that would be the next natural step. If she's lying under oath, indict her. But they didn't indict her because they knew she wasn't lying. They just didn't care. They just didn't want justice. They wanted silence. And just like that, they closed the door. No indictment. Gertrude would not get justice. We don't know everything that happened to Gertrude after the grand jury. But we do know this. The pain didn't end. The weight of what they did stayed. You don't just get over something like that overnight. Maybe not ever. During our research, we came across one more thing. A few months later, Gertrude's name was back in the newspapers. This time for an arrest. Police had come to her home after an argument with her boyfriend. And of course, the papers took the opportunity to blame her once again, painted her as the aggressor. Just a headline meant to shame her. Just another excuse to say, see, she was the problem all along. Because that's what they do. Not only do they harm you, they rewrite the story to say that you did it to yourself. But we're telling this story now to say that that's a lie. Gertrude did not do this to herself. She was not lying. She told the truth then, and we're telling it now, for her, and for all those who never got the chance to tell it for themselves. We have been to some places in this story. We stood on the deck of a slave ship. We walked the roads of the plantation. We moved through the broken promises of Reconstruction. And we found ourselves in Montgomery, Alabama in the 1940s. At the beginning of the civil rights movement, and through every era, through every chapter, there was one constant, one thing that would not move, would not bend, would not break. The relentless disrespect, the deep, unyielding pain inflicted on black women. From the 1700s to the 1800s to the 1900s, it did not change. And so I ask you now, has it changed today? Are our sisters being treated with the dignity that they deserve? Are black women finally being seen, being heard, being honored? Injustice didn't spare black women. Jim Crow didn't spare black women. In many ways, he came after her harder, more deliberately, more relentlessly. He stole her peace, he stole her joy, he stole her time, he stole her labor, he stole her children, and he stole her body. But he could not take her resolve, could not take her will, could not take her spirit. She got up anyway. She raised her children anyway. She loved her family anyway. She showed up anyway. Bruised, but breathing. Shattered, but standing. Hurt, but healing. She kept going. Gertrude kept going. So, I'll come back to how we started this video. Some say black women are angry, say she's too loud, say she's too difficult, say she's aggressive, say she's hard to deal with, say she's too bitter, say she's too strong, say she's just too much. It's what they say. But that's not what I say. I say, you don't know her story. You don't know what she's endured in this land, what she suffered, what she survived. Because if you did, you wouldn't speak so carelessly about her, wouldn't label her so quickly, wouldn't judge her so harshly. If you knew her story, you'd say, black women are resilient, black women are powerful, black women are unshakable. She had to be, because she was not protected. She's strong because you neglected her. She's guarded because you betrayed her. She's tired because you burdened her. She's fierce because you tried to silence her. She's assertive because you muted her pain. She's unyielding because you gave her no choice. She's tough because the world was harder to her. And yet, she still rises. She still shows up. She still carries. She still loves. That's not weakness. That's not anger. That's power. That's black womanhood, and it's sacred. That's black womanhood. Those are our black mothers and our black grandmothers, our black sisters, our black aunts, our black cousins, our black daughters, our black friends. Those are black women. And it's important to know, even though the world does not see your pain, does not see your struggles, does not recognize your worth, and sometimes even tries to make the road harder for you, be not discouraged. They didn't see it on the slave ship, but that didn't stop you from surviving. They didn't see it on the slave plantations, but that did not stop you from surviving. They didn't see it during segregation, but that did not stop you from surviving. Don't let it stop you today. Sisters, keep going, just like they did. Keep doing it. Keep surviving. Do it for yourself. And do it for every little black girl growing up today, entering a world that still may not value her. Do it so that she can lift her head high and say, I am here and I am not going anywhere. This was the third story in our Injustice by Design series. And yes, this was a tough one, but it was a necessary one. Because if we don't tell these stories, who will? And this isn't the last name we're going to learn. There are more stories to uncover, more truths to confront, more evidence to show just how our injustice was their design. I hope you learned something from this story. I know I did. But before we turn the page to the next chapter, I want to hear from you. What stood out to you? What made you pause? What made you reflect? Let me know in the comments. And as always, thank you for joining me on this journey. If you'd like to support the work we've been doing with our Memory Justice Project, check out the link in the description. Until the next time, God bless you and God keep you.